You're listening to The Charity Show, the podcast for charity insiders by charity insiders. If you enjoy the show, please take a second to rate, follow and subscribe on your usual podcast platform. And here's what's coming up in episode 26.
I think that we should be celebrating volunteers every single day of the year. Volunteers are giving their time, energy and skills to causes they care about throughout the nation. Volunteers Week is that special week that's dedicated to celebrating people across the UK that give their time and they deserve the biggest shout out to say thank you, or diolch yn fawr, as we would say in Wales.
All charities, all volunteer including organisations stand to benefit from a community where volunteering is taught from a young age and throughout life. When families, just as standard, as one of the things that families can do together for fun and to pass time and to build community is to volunteer, just as much as they might go to a fun park or a swimming pool together. They're just going to have a volunteering day.
Is there a means by which smaller charities can get in touch with celebrities and get themselves in front of them? You know, literally, it's almost like a pitch, Dragon's Den style. There's so many people, worthy causes out there that just don't come under the radar of these high net worth individuals. So yeah, maybe that's something.
Maybe we need to trademark that, copyright that. Third sector Dragon's Den, quick. Let's get in there quick, Tim.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got the bucks to be able to sit on the panel, Piers, I'm afraid.
Louise Rachel Wells has got in touch with the show this week. She's from the Goodwill Revolution. It's a brand new CIC, that means a community interest company, that's committed to helping those who really need it most in the Black Country. Welcome back to The Charity Show. I'm Piers Townley, PR Manager at the Brain Tumour Charity.
And I'm Tim Beynon, Head of Marketing Engagement at Firefighters Charity. And Piers, this week we're going to be previewing Volunteers Week, which kicks off next Monday. We've got a brilliant interview coming up, as you know, with two experts on all things volunteering. We're speaking to Felicity Walls, who's a volunteer manager at Wales Council for Voluntary Action, and to Alice O'Boyle, who's the Business Development Coordinator at Volunteer Now, two amazing people with some fantastic insights to share with us as well. But before we talk to them about Volunteers Week and what it means to them, what about you, Piers? What does it mean to you and to everybody at the Brain Tumour Charity?
I think it's key to what we do, Tim. I think the sentiment that we couldn't do half as much as we do as a charity, as support and everything else without our volunteers. They're galvanised when we have things like the London Marathon or the Twilight Walk, for example, which is the Brain Tumour Charity's hero kind of event. Everything from photographers, marshals, chairpoints, you know, even designers and other people that want to lend or just to support us, you know, sending out merchandise and things like that. And a massive shout out. We have a young ambassador program as well. 20 odd, you know, young people that have been affected by a brain tumour, and they are just key to representing us at events, but more importantly, things like policy work. So they'll go to the Senate in Wales, they'll go to Holyrood, they'll go to Parliament, and on our behalf, they'll be advocating and sharing their story. So yeah, I think very much like you're going to talk about as well, they're just key to what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right, and the same at Firefighters Charity. Hugely important week for us, Volunteers Week. But I actually agree with our guests who, when our listeners will hear what they have to say very shortly, they say obviously that Volunteers Week is a special week, but we should be celebrating and thanking volunteers every day of the year, not just that week. So yes, let's celebrate them in Volunteers Week, but let's make a big deal of them all year round, I think. And you're absolutely right. So many charities, just like ours, just can't function without volunteers. At Firefighters Charity, they play a hugely important role. We obviously, our trustees are all volunteers, so we're hugely grateful to all of them. We have thousands of volunteers embedded within fire and rescue services across the country as well, who all play important roles, organising events and helping to spread awareness at a sort of very local level and also regionally as well. We have volunteers at our centres who help to sort of show people around and make sure people feel welcome when they get to our centres. We have volunteers who run what we call living well groups in communities all over the country as well. So they help to set up talks and things for our retired community, really important group there. And we've got a whole bunch of people who do things like telephone befriending, who take time out of their day to talk to older people across our retired community as well. So breaching that sort of loneliness gap and helping people to feel connected to us and to the community. So yeah, that's just a handful of roles, and we have volunteers across the whole charity. So we're hugely grateful to them, and they play a vital role in our charity, as they do in charities across the UK. So a really, really, really important week, and it's good to be celebrating them this week. But all that aside, Piers, what's the rest of your week been like?
Just the usual thing that we say, which is 1,000 miles an hour. We're a PR person down in our team. Jade moved on to pastures new. Fantastic opportunity for her, but that means we've got a hole in our PR team. So any PR people out there with a science background, drop me a line. There's a blatant plug for that role. But it just means that, the workload is being spread out, but also multiplied across what we're doing. But this week's been an example of having to wear different hats, different charity hats that we've talked about before, for a lot of celebrity work that I'm doing in the background. My USP is I do a lot of our liaison and our stewardship of the celebrities that are associated with the brain tumour charity. So I've had to put on an event hat, a fundraising hat, a programme design, a bit of editorial hat, and the logistics and refreshments for an event that's happening in June with the author Sophie Kinsella, who supports us, and we support her through her diagnosis. So a fantastic event being organised there that I'll talk more about in future episode. But yeah, all behind the scenes, all this work's going on to then produce this, this amazing event and help some of our celebrity supporters. Alongside that, we've got the actress Amy Nuttall, who has been doing some content work for us, because she's going to run the Royal Parks Half Marathon in October, which is just a wonderful London race as well. So a lot of work in the background, just working closely alongside some of our celebs. So really enjoyable. I absolutely love it. And they're just fantastic people to have associated with the charity. But as you know, you kind of 24/7, aren't you, in this world?
Yeah, multiple hats sounds familiar, Piers. Juggling editorial one hand and canapes in the other. Yeah, know what that's like. For us, a firefighters charity, it's been a different kind of a week, and it's been a really hard week for the charity. And obviously, I'm sure all our listeners are aware of the devastating events in Bicester in Oxfordshire with the deaths of two firefighters, Jenny Logan and Martin Sadler. And it's something that happened that has obviously shaken everyone who knew them, everyone across the fire family, the fire community, and everyone across our charity as well. Thankfully, these kind of things are incredibly rare. They don't happen very often, but when they do, it's heartbreaking for everyone, for the whole community, when these tragic events do happen. And of course, my heart and everyone else at the charity goes out to the friends, family, and colleagues of Jenny and Martin, and everyone who's been impacted by those terrible events the other week. It has really, brought the best out of our charity in many ways, though. It's a strange thing. These things happen. It also does bring out, the good quite a lot as well. And you see that in communities across the country when events happen, people pull together. And we've been working hard across the charity to do everything we can to support all those people who've been impacted by the events, those closest to it, as well as the wider fire community, because these kind of events also help to reinforce and remind people of the danger faced by firefighters on a daily basis, and the fragility of life, and they go every day and put themselves in danger, and it kind of does remind everybody of those kind of challenges faced by the community. And just as we did following events like the Grenfell Tower fire, we've seen the great British public showing their support and their affection for the fire community by donating and reaching out to us themselves as well. And in a way, that's been inspiring to see. It's one of those events you never want to happen, but it's inspiring to see the response to it and what's happened, and people putting on fundraisers, donating to us, reaching out to us, and wanting to do their bit, show their support for the families, for Oxfordshire Fire Rescue Service, and for the whole fire community. So yeah, it's been a week that none of us at the charity want to repeat again in a hurry. And I think if you're okay with it, Piers, I'd like to dedicate this episode of the show to the memory of Jenny and Martin, to, by all accounts, from what we've heard, we're both remarkable firefighters and remarkable people who will be hugely missed. This week on The Charity Show, we're diving into a special Volunteers Week episode, and this one's packed with heart, insight and practical ideas. We're joined by two brilliant guests, Felicity Walls, Volunteering Manager at Wales Council for Voluntary Action, and Alice O'Boyle from Volunteer Now in Northern Ireland. Between them, they've seen volunteering from just about every angle, from grassroots organising to government strategy, and they've got a lot to say about how the landscape is shifting. This conversation is split, as usual, into two parts. In part one, we look at how volunteering is evolving, from micro and one-off roles to family volunteering and youth involvement. Flik shares her personal journey as a parent volunteering with small children, and Alice explores how we can create more inclusive and motivating opportunities for young people and families to get involved. Then, in part 2, we turn the spotlight on volunteer managers, the often unsung heroes who make it all happen. We talk about the pressures they face, the skills they need, and what kind of support they deserve if we want volunteering to thrive. It's honest, insightful, and at times moving, and we're so pleased to share it with you. Flik and Alice, welcome to the Charity Show. Fantastic to see you and to welcome you onto this special Volunteers Week edition of the Charity Show. We're coming out about the week before Volunteers Week. Unfortunately, the way that our show works and the way it falls, we're not exactly bang on Volunteers Week, but we're the week before. So this is our special build-up episode to Volunteers Week. So fantastic to see you and to welcome you onto the show. Perhaps the best place to start, tell us a little bit about Volunteers Week and what it means to each of you. Why is Volunteers Week special for each of you? Flik, first off.
Well, I think that we should be celebrating volunteers every single day of the year. Volunteers are giving their time, energy and skills to causes they care about throughout the nation. Volunteers Week is that special week that's dedicated to celebrating people across the UK that give their time, and they deserve the biggest shout out to say thank you, or diolch yn fawr, as we would say in Wales. This year we've got more resources than ever, more different ways for people to get involved and to celebrate. There's going to be events everywhere, and for this year we're excited that we've got some special Volunteer Week colouring pages, we've got crochet patterns, and we really hope to see people getting involved and celebrating and sharing on social media throughout the week.
Fantastic. And Alice, what about you? What does the week mean for you?
Well, I would echo what Flik says there, in that, you know, it's almost like the cliche about Christmas time. You should have Christmas in your heart all year round. That's also true of Volunteers Week. We always want to be celebrating volunteers. But Volunteers Week and the International Day of the Volunteer, which happens 6 months later, sort of at the other end of the year, are just a really great opportunity to allow organisations that include volunteers, which are usually very busy and very underfunded organisations a lot of time. It just allows them to carve out that time to really make a big fuss of their volunteers. And beyond just saying thank you to volunteers who do a tremendous amount of work throughout the whole of the UK, it's also time to just stop and think about just volunteering and volunteerism generally, and how it really speaks to the better angels of our nature and the desire that we have to help each other and be in community with each other. You know, the world can seem like a pretty harsh and hostile place sometimes. And volunteering and volunteers and the work they do really remind us of what we have in us that's really great.
I'd echo both those sentiments, Alice, Flik. That's fantastic. I mean, they're the volunteers, the backbone of the Brain Tumour Charity where I work, and we couldn't do half the events that we do without them. So celebrating them, championing, supporting them. What does a good celebration of volunteers in 2025 look like to both of you? Flik, I'll ask you first.
Well, I think if you could start where your volunteers are really, and actually tapping into their individual motivations and interest in that celebration. So some volunteers, in fact all volunteers, would quite like a thank you, a really, really simple thank you when they do their volunteering. Some volunteers love to kind of have a certificate and have a big fuss made of them, and some really don't. So one of the things we always say to organisations is to make sure that your volunteers are happy with there were different ways that you've decided to volunteer. What we will see a lot of in Volunteers Week and the weeks that follow is those big flashy award events where volunteers are brought together to celebrate their volunteering. But that doesn't, devalue the smaller things that organisations are doing. One of the great things that I absolutely loved to hear was one of the charities in Wales is giving their staff a load of volunteers to ring, and then staff will be calling their volunteers and saying a personal thank you, which really enables the volunteers to be thanked, but it also then highlights to the staff what it is that those volunteers do and building those connections. Lots of different ways that we can see celebrations happening.
So that's like a two-way appreciation, but also a learning, isn't it, for the staff as well? It was some elements of a charity's staff would have not any direct contact with the volunteers, so it's a fantastic way of bringing those two together. Alice, what would it mean to you?
Yeah, well, I would echo what Flik was saying there, in that really what you want to be doing is you want to be avoiding the dear valued volunteer one-size-fits-all celebration of volunteers. Generally, there is almost as many motivations to volunteer as there are volunteers. And your sincere thank you, a meaningful thank you, should reflect what it is that is motivating a volunteer to volunteer. So as Flik mentioned, if it's somebody who wants to have a certificate or build up their skill set, it's very important to have those certificates and those kind of public thank yous. But it's also really important to remember a huge number of volunteers really will tell you directly, oh, I don't do this for thanks, I don't want to be thanked. You have volunteers who are motivated by a desire to make a difference and make a change. And one of the biggest thank yous you can give that kind of volunteer is the facts and figures of the difference they have made, not just how many volunteer hours, but how many lives changed, how much money was raised, and then what do you do with that money? How does their voluntary work actually change and improve the world? Pointing that out, not just to them, but to everyone else, to remind everyone else of the huge amount of work that's happening sort of right under their noses, unpaid for and often unknown about.
I think that's really important, and at Firefighter Charity we try to do that and just remind our volunteers and show them that the impact of their work, the little things they do every day, the big impact it has on people in their locality, in their local communities, but also across the country as well. So I think showing and recognising the impact of volunteering is really, really important. So I completely agree with you, Alice, on that front. Can you both recall recently a sort of single moment perhaps, or been made aware of a moment, a volunteering moment that kind of reflects the breadth and the scope and the importance of the work that volunteers do? Has anything struck you recently? Alice, first off.
Well, it's not super recent. It's kind of a bit COVID-y time, which now seems like a million years ago. But at the time that was happening, when it first came to lockdowns, I was working for a large cancer charity in a volunteer management position. And it suddenly became very, very clear as the world was starting to lock down and the statutory services, the healthcare services and social work services that we had interacted with were completely at a loss in terms of identifying who is out there that is totally isolated. Obviously they have people in their system that they knew about, but they knew that there were so many more that only charitable and local community organisations would have known about. And they needed so many more drivers and shoppers and helpers. In those first few weeks and months, being at the coalface and being at the interface of trying to gather up information about which pharmacies will deliver and who can get where, it became really, really clear to me that this nation would have gone into a state of collapse without charitable and voluntary sector and community sector volunteers just willing to give their time, their effort and their knowledge. In those first few days and weeks, certainly, there would have been a lot of very vulnerable people completely unaided without that there. And that quiet backbone. And nothing like a crisis makes it more clear how essential volunteers are in the instant that something bad happens, and how quickly they can mobilise and how hard they will work for no money and for nothing but an interest in other people. And I know that was a while ago, but just being involved with them at that time made it clear to me how nothing could have run in those first few weeks without volunteers.
Yeah, I think that was really good to see. Really sort of blitz spirit. I remember lots of people referring to it as the blitz spirit and people pulling together in the same direction. Really fantastic to see. Flik, what about you? Has anything sort of comes to mind about something that just reflects the amazing work that volunteers do?
Yeah, I think in Wales, so we have these youth-led grant panels that operate all across Wales. And so we have young people that are grant makers and then young people that apply to have their projects funded. And I've worked with this project for a very, very, very long time. And every year I hear the stories. There's like this similar, like it's like a thread through them of how, the young volunteers that become grant makers get that really kind of powerful opportunity to be decision makers in their local community, and how that helps to connect them and deepen their understanding of what it is to be, a good citizen and to understand what's happening and how they can change that through these decision making processes. And then to see the projects that get funded, which are so, so varied and creative and different, that really then tap into the interests and aspirations of individual young people, and again support their connectivity, their skill building, their networks, and in a way that, you know, is all about what it is, what matters to them. And I think that's really important to volunteer, and we touched on it already, is what is it that matters to the individual, and how can you help them bring that to life, whether that's through a more traditional role or whether that's through them creating those roles for themselves.
That's really interesting, Flik. I suppose it's a subject we have time and time again on the podcast. It's engaging with the youngsters, the youth. I mean, it's a cliche when you say it like that, but engaging and working the roles in a charity to them. So touching on that, Flik, I was going to ask you about micro volunteering, and what does that look like, and how may that be used? How may that develop into, you know, engagement with say, a younger generation, or with your normal cadre of volunteers that an organisation has?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's different ways of defining micro volunteering. So it could be that it's either a really small voluntary contribution that's like taking a photo of a broken cycle path, or citizen science type projects like counting butterflies, something that's really small, succinct, task and finish. And that could be done, you know, over a series of times, or it could just be really one-off. Other ways that micro volunteering is referred to is a slightly longer contribution. So whether that's half a day, a few hours, something like that, but it's got a few more hours behind it. So that might be proofreading a document, litter picking, or helping out at an annual event. What we found in terms of what research is telling us globally about volunteering is that people are leaning towards these more sort of shorter term, one-off and very flexible types of volunteering. So micro volunteering, you know, can kind of lean into that. And whilst, you know, on the surface, you might see that as being a kind of a one-off, a very small input, actually, it could be the collective input of many, which therefore has a bigger impact. Or something that we like to talk to organisations about is how do you use that small input to start to build a longer term relationship? Like, what happens when they finish that micro piece? How are you making them feel? How are you building that relationship? And would it be possible that maybe you ask them to come back, which might be in a year's time, might be in a couple of weeks, and it will very much depend on the role and those opportunities. And, you know, with these youth-led grant projects that we fund, they wouldn't necessarily be micro-volunteering projects, but it is that much shorter, sharper task and finish input that is typically happening. And from that, those volunteers are growing into either longer term with that organisation, or into thinking that volunteering is something I would like to do at some point in the future. And that's great, because we've got to think about, you know, the long term here, and that we're building, you know, volunteers for life, even though they might ebb and flow in and out of that.
Flik, I just want to pick up on what you said there about the fact that micro volunteering could be a sort of stepping stone to longer term engagement and a longer term relationship for an individual with a charity. With that in mind, what would your advice be to charities then that might be struggling to recruit volunteers? Because there might be this misconception perhaps that, volunteers requires a huge commitment. I don't have the time to do it. You know, I can't possibly fit that in around everything else. What would your advice be to them to perhaps reconsider volunteering and to perhaps introduce micro volunteering as a stepping stone?
Yeah, so I think, obviously organisations will be looking at their bigger picture, their bigger strategy, their vision for volunteering, and from that will come their kind of what needs to be done. So if they're then thinking at that stage, well, this is the things that need to be done, these are the things that would enhance our service, and these are the things that could be done by volunteers, is then, well, you know, does any of that lend itself well to something that is a much shorter term? Once they get to that point, it's then thinking about, well, what does that, how do you market that? And it might well be being some targeted marketing towards where we know people are going to do those shorter term interventions. So whether that's tagging it into a related campaign. So Micro Volunteering Day is one of those. You've also got things like the Big Help Out. It may be something you market in Volunteers Week, perhaps. Your audiences might be students, recently having conversations with the Duke of Edinburgh, for example. So young people give a relatively short contribution over a short period of time. So how do you package something then to fit that need and interest and motivation, and then get your welcome right? So when they come on board, get that onboarding right, so they feel very welcome, very involved, very much I can do this task, and crack on. And then that kind of that end of that experience or post experience, so follow up, in the way that you might follow up, and then obviously, how do you build that relationship going forward? Now, I'm talking very generally because actually, this can happen in so many different guises, but if we think of it in a sort of real experience, something like the butterfly count survey citizen science piece is, the welcome and the role is really very simple to do. There's a few emails to get you started. They give you everything you need. They remind you about it. And then once you've done it and submitted, you get this really lovely thank you. And then from that, then they continue to try and build a relationship. And if we take a step back further again, I appreciate we're very much here talking about volunteering, but we're part of an ecosystem where actually there's other things that we might want people to support us with over the years. And so building a relationship with our cause, with our organisation, all of that is, really important and beneficial to us and beneficial to the individual that gives as well.
So it does sound like the plethora of smaller roles. So Alice, I'm just wondering, does this mean that your metaphorical spreadsheet of organising and managing is huge? Is it making this much more difficult? Or actually is this part of just the way sometimes charities, volunteer managing is evolving? And once you've built it in place, what's it looking like at the moment? Is it a bit of a headache or is it a bit of this is incredible?
If you are a volunteer manager and you are delivering a volunteer-led service that's a regular weekly counselling service, let's say, ad hoc, flexible micro-volunteering isn't going to work for that role. And the logistical nightmare that would be caused by trying to manage a regular service with irregular volunteers, it would be really, really difficult. And sometimes organisations are finding themselves in that situation. And therefore, volunteer managers need that extra support about how to adapt your volunteering style to meet that different type of volunteer. On the other hand, flexible volunteering and micro-volunteering is actually potentially a really rich scene for new recruitment pathways and new access to different types of volunteers. So I went to a conference, I think, last year about volunteering, and somebody used the analogy of dating and marriage, in that people are happy to date your organisation and see if they like it, but they don't want to be locked down to marriage right away. They don't want to be locked into so many hours per week straight away. They would like just a little taster to see if they like you or not. And that's where flexi volunteering, micro volunteering can be an excellent recruitment tool for organisations. Because insofar as people are volunteering increasingly due to activism or because they really care for causes, or they really particularly like what your organisation is doing, that is your opportunity to have a speed date with a lot of people and give them as good an experience, as meaningful a volunteering experience as you possibly can in such a small period of time. And as Flik said, then you start to make that relationship and build that relationship. So this week, it's a little micro volunteering opportunity. Then maybe the next time we meet with you, it's a flexi volunteering opportunity where we would like an hour or two every month, but it's up to you when those hours are. And as you start to build that relationship with us, and we very carefully as volunteer managers make sure that you're having a meaningful and rewarding experience, you don't have to persuade people to do things that they enjoy. Basically is what I would say. If you can make the volunteering experience truly meaningful and enjoyable, you don't really need to do much more after that. People will go where they feel wanted, where they feel they're making a difference. But you will need a bit of support initially, I would say, as a volunteer manager, to think differently about how to create different roles, how to think about a role that maybe was a role for one person and they came in 3 hours a week every week. You can't get that filled. Should you have 3 people offer 1 hour a month? And it's about thinking about that differently and thinking in terms of the fact that people are very careful of their time now. They're very precious about what they're going to do with their spare time. And you are now in competition with not just every other volunteering role, but every other pastime and hobby, and potentially getting the cost of living crisis, every other part-time income role as well. So that it sort of behooves you to make that experience as pleasant and pleasurable as possible, and their experience of interacting with your organisation as rewarding as possible. And what you will then find, what we have found before when we do things like what's called a turn up and try event, is that when people just get a little taster for something that they really love, that's enough to persuade them back in. And those micro volunteering, flexi volunteering opportunities are like a little taster. And they can really help you to plug that sort of recruitment gap that an awful lot of organisations are experiencing at the moment.
Yes, would you have any advice for an organisation, for a volunteer manager then perhaps, in terms of, just interesting what you were saying about making those micro opportunities meaningful and enjoyable? Is there a secret to that? How do you do that whilst also making sure as an organisation that you actually get what you want out of it as well? Is there a secret to that?
Yes, you need to strike that balance between, it needs to have a purpose for you. So as that sort of a butterfly counting or bird counting is perfect, because people can do it in their own back garden or in their own area when they're walking. That sort of thing is perfect for that. But in terms of making it meaningful or as enjoyable as possible, what I would suggest is think about your current and ideal volunteer base and think about what is motivating people to join, because every organisation that includes volunteers might have different sets of motivation. So you'll have the social motivation of I want to make friends, get out of the house and be less lonely, the motivation of wanting to build on their skill set, add to their CV perhaps. Then you've got the motivation of the actual cause itself, that people are particularly moved by a cause or they really want to be involved in it. And have a think about how you can make your role really feed into one or whichever one of those your volunteers are most likely to have. So I'm thinking about charities to do with, say, health-based charities, especially cancer-based charities, are usually very personally motivated. People have personal stories with that. They really want to give back. It's very emotional and meaningful for them. And so you want to describe that micro-volunteering role and have it experienced as something where they can see that they're making a difference against cancer, let's say, where they can see how collectively this all and that's what Flik was talking about, at the end of the micro volunteering, feed back to people and say thank you to them. You want to feed back to them as a whole. What did all of this micro volunteering, what did this thing that you were a part of, how did that make a change in the world, or how did that make a difference? Or if you're dealing with volunteers who really want to build different skills or build their CD skills, make a list of all of the things that they learned as part of that micro volunteering, what new skills they could pick up if they kept coming back and doing it. It really is just thinking about what motivates a volunteer, or what tends to motivate volunteers for your organisation, and creating roles that really speaks to that motivation primarily.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Alice, you say that, especially when you mentioned before about, there's so many pressures, particularly on younger people, for their time, their attention, their passion. So Flik, what would you say to back this up? If for example, they're building micro volunteering around things like Duke of Edinburgh and stuff, how do you motivate specifically younger people and, crucially get them to be re-engaged on a continual basis?
Well, I think just, agreeing a lot with what Alice has said there, obviously we sometimes talk about young people as a separate group, and we need to think about that, certainly, but also in general, in terms of what makes a good volunteer experience, what builds a good relationship. It's very similar stuff. So in terms of kind of attracting those young people in, it is again about thinking about their motivations, their cause, their passion. And, obviously you would try and sell that through the lenses that the young people might see it. So things like social media may well be your best friend. Not all young people are on social media these days, so that is worth bearing in mind. And if you're not an expert in those spaces, that can actually make it quite disconnected if you're trying to put on a really cool TikTok video and that's not your expertise. Young people will see through that really, really quickly. So it may well be bringing in other experts. There might be young people, they might not be, but who can support that kind of integration. And then working with, where are young people? So obviously schools is a captive audience. Some voluntary organisations don't always make those connections very well for lots of reasons. Schools and teachers are very, very busy. But then there's lots of sort of voluntary youth organisations and uniform youth that, again, is a good access in to where young people might be, and also thinking where other young people might be getting support, so through homeless projects or people referral units. Young people are in lots of different places, and actually sometimes as simple as being asked, and sometimes people don't think to ask young people or to ask parents or to ask people who think that it just isn't right for them, but actually when you ask and have the conversation and it's very two-way of how would this be beneficial for you, then together, you may well be able to work out something that is benefit for everybody.
It's great to hear that interview back again. It's such an inspirational pair, Tim. And we'll hear more from Flik and Alice in a minute after we've delved into a bit of third sector news. What have you got for us this week, Tim?
Okay, this is one that I'm keen to get your opinion on, Piers, actually. So I'll read the story and then let's have a little conversation and see where you stand on this. So a Bristol-based charity is hoping to make the city the first in the UK where smartphones are banned from all, let me emphasise all, classrooms. The charity, Papaya, which stands for Parents Against Phone Addiction in Young Adolescents, is calling on parents to delay giving their children smartphones until at least the age of 14. Campaigners believe this could significantly improve young people's mental health. The organisation is working with more than 100 schools in Bristol and has secured commitments from 10 institutions to implement stricter policies. Now, Dr. Susie Davies, the founder of Papaya, said, "We want them to have a phone-free environment in schools so they can concentrate on their learning, but also socialising in break time and not addicted to their phones, in other words." Papaya predicts that by the start of the next school term, a majority of Bristol's secondary schools could be signed up to their smartphone-free initiative. So this is a great story and a great example, I think, of a small charity with a big agenda and one that is really creating headlines. That story was from the BBC website. And I think this is a really important conversation. Obviously, we've both got teenagers in our houses, Piers, and I think Australia might already be ahead of the game here. I think they've introduced something very similar over there that's actually been passed as law, I think. But where do you stand on the whole thing around teenagers and smartphones, Piers? It's a controversial topic. What do you reckon?
In our house, we had this conversation probably from the moment we wake up to the moment before we go to bed in some form or another. They're amazing things, smartphones, let's be honest. They have opened the world up. We saw in COVID how kind of interaction and social media kind of did help a lot of teenagers to kind of maintain a social cohesion. But obviously, you know, the algorithms terrify me. The social media, the speed of it is bewildering and bedazzling, even for me as a parent, let alone my two kids. But you know, luckily, my daughter's school, they do ban them during the day. You're got to hand them in at the beginning. You've got to give them back at the evening. But that still means that you're connected. You're turned on 24/7. It is a nightmare. It's a minefield for parents, I think. And the amount of battles that people have up and down the country with the arguments about screen time and what you're doing. And I think we're just finding out ourselves about it and about its implications onto the to society as a whole. It's a bit of a Pandora's box, isn't it? It's going to be very difficult to put it back in there. You would hope that we can get more accustomed, more protected with some of the social media stuff, but I don't see any solutions happening soon. I mean, I don't know about yours, but it's a nightmare with us. It
is. No, I'm totally with you on that. It is a total nightmare in terms of trying to police mobile phone use in my own house. It's very, very difficult. So it does lead to arguments. It does lead to stress. But at the same time, that is the generation that's grown up with mobile phones. They are a digital first generation, and I think that's something that we've got to accept. But try and find a way to live with it and try to manage it, and that's not easy. But I think a lot of different people, different organisations have to take some accountability. All the social media giants, for example, are they doing enough? Is government doing enough to put pressure on them to make sure that they police their own backyards better than they currently do? I don't think they probably are, but that's an interesting one. And I think this whole conversation, the one we're having and that Papaya is leading on in Bristol, it's a great example of how charities can campaign for change. And if the government won't step in or doesn't step in or hasn't stepped in or hasn't yet stepped in, as we've seen before with other things, the third sector does. So we're the ones putting pressure on the decision makers to take action. So good luck to Papaya. I'm really keen to see how that goes. I'll keep an eye on things. Keen for them to reach out to us and get in touch if you'd like to share and talk about anything that you're doing. I think it's a really important conversation. So some really powerful stuff there. But yeah. Anyway, what about you, Piers? What have you spotted in the news this week?
Oh, it's the F word again, Tim. It's the fundraising. It's the donations. It's the high worth individuals that have been highlighted by the Sunday Times giving list. The wealthiest people in the UK, it reports, gave nearly 500 million more to charity over the past year. All this research has been published in association with the Charities Aid Foundation. The Sunday Times giving list tracks the philanthropic activity of 100 individuals listed in the Sunday Times Rich List and the 40 richest under 40. This year's list 2025 shows that the top 100 collectively gave 3.7 billion to charity, either personally or through their charitable foundations, their trusts, their businesses. But this compared with 3.2 billion last year. So we're talking huge amounts of money here. And the feature carries on, the research carries on that English singer, songwriter, and I know you've got a poster of him on your wall, Tim, Harry Styles. Harry Styles entered the list for the first time at position number 15. Styles is worth, I'm going to call him Styles rather than Harry, I don't know him that well. Styles is worth an estimated 225 million, but he's given away 5.2 million to causes such as social, children and humanitarian good causes. Meanwhile, British singer, songwriter and pianist Elton John, I don't think we need to introduce him, I think everyone knows who he is, he's worth an estimated 475 million. And he's in 6th place, having donated 26 million to causes including HIV and AIDS, arts and humanitarian foundations. So we're talking vast amounts of money here by ultra high worth individuals. And quoted in Civil Society, the feature, Neil Heslop, who's chief executive of the Charities Aid Foundation, said that high net worth individuals are critical to enabling charities to do more of their life-changing work. For charitable organisations, he goes on to say, there's never been a more difficult combination of circumstances. Demands are through the roof, costs are up dramatically higher, and income is under pressure. He concludes by saying if wealthy individuals were given just 1% of their investable assets, as the people at the top of the giving list are doing, that's 19.9 billion going into the charity sector on an annual basis. So we're talking huge amounts of money there. We just need to kind of rattle those metaphorical collection tins in the direction of some of these high worth individuals and these foundations. I think if you've got a major donor or a philanthropy team in your charity, they're all over this. I know they are at the Brain Tumour Charity.
Yeah, gosh, absolutely. Do you know what though, Piers? I think this is really interesting. You mentioned there, obviously, you know, there are a lot of charities that have those teams in place and have the luxury of having people who specialise in high net worth individuals and who can court celebrities of the Styles and John ilk. But there are millions of, well, not millions, hundreds of thousands of small charities that don't have that luxury. How can they tap into this? You know, obviously this 100 richest people in the country giving away billions of pounds, but I bet it's the majority of that money is going towards well-established large charities,
the big hitters,
and not to the small charities. So how can small charities tap into that? That's what I'd like to find out. I guess
some of it is also fortuitous, for good or bad. You know, if a celebrity is touched by a particular cause personally or whatever is in their part of their brand or part of their makeup, then maybe that's how these, the charity and the individual could get connected. But, apart from fortuitous luck and stuff, that is a really tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it'd be a really interesting one to see in terms of how is there a way, is there an organisation, is there a means by which smaller charities can get in touch with celebrities and get themselves in front of them? Literally, it's almost like a pitch, Dragon's Den style, stuff. How can they do that? How can they? There's just so many people, worthy causes out there that just don't come under the radar of these high net worth individuals and would probably do very well to do so. So yeah, maybe that's something.
Maybe we need to trademark that, copyright that. Third sector Dragon's Den, quick. Let's get in there quick, Tim. Yeah. But yes, you're right. That sort of system, that sort of thing needs to be there.
I'm not sure I've got the bucks to be able to sit on the panel, Piers, I'm afraid.
In the second half of our Volunteers Week special, we're picking up where we left off with Flik Williams and Alice O'Boyle. This time, we're turning the spotlight on the people behind the scenes, volunteer managers. We'll be talking about why their role is so often overlooked, how it's becoming more complex, and what support they need to keep doing this vital work. There's also some great advice here for small charities feeling overwhelmed by the shift towards more flexible and micro volunteering. Let's jump back in.
It's a really interesting subject, and I think I'd like to move us on to talk about a similar subject, an aligned subject in terms of family volunteering. Now, Piers and I both got teenage children, so some advice here would be good. In terms of what is the appetite, what are you seeing, Flik, is the appetite amongst parents and children to get involved in something charitable, something volunteering related together? What's the appetite like for that family volunteering? What can Piers and I learn from you from that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm coming to this as a parent of a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, so it's a very different life stage. And actually what I found is that when I became a parent, I still wanted to volunteer, but actually I was now going to be doing it in a very micro format or with my children. So that led me to, explore what was available and how could I get involved in family volunteering with my children. And actually this is starting to become a growing area because of what we've been talking about in terms of those, pressures on time for people to volunteer, is how can you make this more inclusive, which works for parents like me with very small children, but actually can also work for parents with older children or for grandparents that look after children or other units of family. Family can mean quite a few things. So we are seeing that happening, and there's a few organisations doing it, but an organisation that's working across England and Wales is the Family Volunteering Club, and they're really starting to open doors around what this family volunteering could look like, and how we can make that appropriate, beneficial to organisations, safe for those people that are taking part. Obviously, a role for a 3-year-old and a role for a 15-year-old is going to be different, but again, it's calling on volunteer managers to be really creative in what are those roles and how could they be fulfilled by people of different ages and stages.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that, Flik, actually, because apart from the practical hurdles of having a newborn or a very, very small child, is it that you're finding, or that the industry, the third sector's finding, that actually charities and organisations aren't quite yet set up to do family volunteering, or is it something that's kind of being picked up at pace?
I think in the main that a lot of the organisations that would be leaning into it would be organisations that already have that comfort level of working in that way. But let's imagine a family centre. That is something that would have been happening on a really informal basis for a long time. It's just whether they add any formal layers to it. And again, if we're talking about very small children, then there are limited roles that perhaps you might look to get those children and families involved with. The types of things that I've seen that have worked quite well is that working together in sort of in a garden, doing some planting together, making cards for isolated residents, or doing sort of other kind of conservation type bits, and that works quite well. But if we were talking about older children, particularly mentioned having teenagers, there would be more things that could be done together. It's actually whether sometimes family volunteering isn't the right solution, and sometimes it is, and it depends very much on the family and what they want to get out of it. So my experience was about that together time as a family. It was partly about the access of I can't go because I'm now on maternity leave and spending a lot of time with my children. But it has become this kind of spending time together and enjoying the world together. How can we contribute, and teaching, my family and other people teaching their families about community needs and building empathy and kindness.
Yeah, and Alice, just sort of leading on from that, from your experience and just touching on what Flik was saying there, what do you feel is the value in family and sort of intergenerational volunteering, bringing, as Flik was saying, there's sort of families can mean many things to different people. There's intergenerational, different grandparents, parents, bringing families together. What can charities gain by designing volunteering around families?
Well, I'd say the most obvious thing that a charity is going to gain is that all charities, all volunteer including organisations, stand to benefit from a community where volunteering is taught from a young age and throughout life. When families just as standard, as one of the things that families can do together for fun and to pass time and to build community is to volunteer, just as much as they might go to a fun park or a swimming pool together, they're just going to have a volunteering day. That means that you have a community, a society of people who are exposed to the idea of volunteerism and social action from a really young age, and they're exposed to how much fun it can be and how much it can build community and how positive it can be. But there's also the possibility that you are really if you allow for family volunteering and just do the little bits of tweaks and changes here and there to make roles open to families, you're really putting your money where your mouth is when it comes to equality and diversity and inclusion. So an awful lot of people, and like Flik was saying, her situation is, I've met people who volunteered all their life and then they had a baby and they weren't able to do it, even if they wanted to, because a baby wouldn't be welcome and be worried about how to ensure that and what could possibly be done. And we found in our events team in Volunteer Now, whenever we opened up events to groups and families can volunteer together, we found that the amount of Southeast Asian candidates increased. And so we were perhaps learning there that different cultures volunteer in different ways. They see volunteering not as an individual thing, but a thing that families and groups do together. That was something we learned almost by accident. And so it's remembering that volunteering, like anything else, where you're the new girl or the new boy and you have to turn up on your own, that can be very intimidating. Whereas if you're allowed to bring a gang of your friends or your chosen family or your actual family with you, and that the organisation welcomes your family and don't treat children as if they're inconvenience and actually make them feel welcome and included, then that's an organisation that you're much more likely to come back to. And you're going to open your doors to a more diverse volunteer base. And everybody needs as many volunteers as they can get their hands on, and that's going to be a benefit for everyone.
Yeah, I was just going to come back to the younger generation as well, Alice and Flik. And I was thinking, I'm at a stage now where we're building a CV for my son, and it's that old cliche of this could look great on your CV, do a bit of volunteering. And I'm just wondering, is that still a kind of relevant thing to have in an organisation's pitch to a younger generation, or is that kind of a little bit dated, do you think? Is there another way of spinning that?
I think it probably is relevant to have it, but I wouldn't. It's like Flik said earlier, it's like young people are just the people. They really aren't that different. And yes, it's fine to appeal to your desire to build professional skills or build a CV. That's fine. But I think it's also worth paying attention to the world that we're living in currently. And all of the activism that's happening around the world is primarily being led by young people. Young people are not just moved by their own interests and by their own career. They really are moved by activism, by causes close to their heart. Climate change. I mean, you look at Greta Thunberg. She was a very young person doing a huge amount of work in that field. So let's not patronize them, or let's not pigeonhole them into people who are just interested in their career, and actually give volunteering let volunteering give them an opportunity to think about themselves as you're members of a wider society. What political or social or any other type of activism or cause do you care about? And young people care about things very passionately, and it could be activism, or it could be the arts, because volunteerism, as we know, exists in every sector. And so it's really thinking about, what do young people care about? What are they talking about? So, for example, young people talk about, say, a loneliness epidemic, feeling alienated, and they lack contact with community. Volunteering is a fantastic way to build social skills and make friends and have a sense of community. So if you want to attract young people into volunteering, my first port of call for advice would be, find out what young people are around you and what do they care about, what are they passionate about just naturally, and tap into that in the same way that you would with adults, is tap into what actually motivates them.
I just wanted also just to pick up on something you said, Alice, because I completely agree with what you said about a lot of activism being driven by young people these days. And we've talked today about the challenge for charities to attract young volunteers, but have either of you actually seen the opposite? Have you actually seen young people approaching charities and saying, I want to do this? Have you got examples of young people proactively wanting to volunteer their time? Is that something that charities are beginning to see, perhaps?
Well, it's something that I've seen. I wouldn't say that it's something that's happening in huge numbers, but individual young people or individual parents contacting us, and it's not for a Duke of Ed and it's not for a UCAS forum. It's that they want their children to be more active in society and they want them to be out and about, and they can't quite figure out what hobby they might have, but would there be something in volunteering for them? And if they're under 14, it's increasingly difficult, certainly in Northern Ireland, to find something for them. Certainly from 14 upwards, they could really work in a charity show, and from 16 and 18, it gets a little bit easier. People, I think, some organisations are a little bit nervous about, well, I suppose, and they are right to be, about safeguarding and interacting with children and insurance and all the different sort of levels of protection that they would need with children. But I think that increasingly young people are making a move towards the charitable and voluntary sector. And I would be very keen that they have as soft and welcoming a landing as they can. But at the same time, I have a caveat on the people who are charged, the volunteer managers and leaders and coordinators who are charged with doing that are just so extremely busy all the time, and having to adapt to a younger audience or create roles or consider the logistics of including children it's not easy, but it does seem to be, at least early indications are that is a direction of travel, that young people are making contact. And I think then what we would need to do in organisations like Volunteer Now is train and equip the volunteer leaders and managers on how to grab that with both hands, really, and make the most of it.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm really keen to see that. Anything to get my kids off their devices, I think it's great. Anything we can do on that front would be fantastic. Alice, let's just dig into the role of the volunteer manager. I think it's it's been said before that for volunteer managers, that role is perhaps a bit underappreciated within the sector and within the individual charities. Why do you think that might be?
I think the role of volunteer manager is a little underappreciated as an extension of the fact that sometimes the role of volunteer is underappreciated. You will hear people say, well, it's only a volunteer, it was just a volunteer. And that kind of language, since we're talking about language, really does betray a sort of lack of respect for professionalism, the expertise that a lot of volunteers bring, and organisations, even if they are charities or volunteer including organisations, that kind of idea as volunteers as nice added extra unnecessaries can sort of carry over into the person who is asked to manage them. And sometimes in a lot of organisations you will find that the person who is in charge of managing and recruiting volunteers is also the fundraiser, or also the training officer, or also something else. And so the job gets swapped down into a part of another job. But and I think that certainly the research and the work that we have done, the sort of questionnaires and workshops that we have done with volunteer managers, is that we get the impression that it's quite an isolated job, it's quite a lonely job, it's quite an underappreciated job, and they think that you're just looking after the nice extra people, and it really doesn't take account of the exceptional people management skills that are required to manage a team of volunteers. Because you don't have any of the contractual obligations or carrot and stick of money at all. Everything has to be entirely person-centred. And if you have a team of 50 volunteers, you need to know every single one of those people and deal with them as people every time that you're interacting with them. Plus your recruitment is much more frequent in volunteering than with paid staff. And it's so much more personal as a management style, and it requires a sort of very similar but distinct set of skills from, say, HR management. And I think not so much lack of respect, but the lack of appreciation for the volume of work involved just comes, I think, as an extension of maybe a lack of appreciation for what volunteers are beyond just cheap labour.
So it sounds, Alice, like the role has and is continuing to become a lot more complex, a lot more hats to wear, the people management skills, the social skills that you have to bring. Would you say that it's becoming a lot more complex as a role that needs to be a lot more understood?
Yes, I think it is. But I think a lot of roles are becoming more complex because you need all the people management skills that you would to line manage staff, plus sort of extra sort of people skills to engage people on a really personal level. You need to understand what everybody's different motivation is and understand that those motivations change and keep up to date with them. But then on top of that, you've got the complexity of, are we going to be doing this online or face-to-face? So you need to have, on top of all technological changes, AI is now being introduced in the charity and voluntary sector. You've got to be on top of that. If you're including young people, got to be on top of social media, and as you say, you've got to be really on top of it. You can't just do surface level because people will notice. And also then they're dealing, it's more complex because the world is more complex than it was even 5 years ago. And so you maybe always had a cohort of people who were willing to sign up to be a regular volunteer. And now the expectation of volunteers is that they'll be able to pick it up and put it down and have it be more flexible. And micro volunteering, like we were talking about before, that adds another level of complexity on top of that. So I think it is getting more complicated and difficult. But in the good news column is that there are moves to, so you've got the Association of Volunteer Managers, you've got membership organisations, you've got places where volunteers, managers and leaders can start to go and draw support from each other and from best practice guidelines. So it is getting more complex, and as the way this sector is always getting a little bit poorer because funding is always being cut, so that sort of adds complexity to it. But I think there is more, I think sort of online tech as well, that ability to draw down peer support from online support networks and so forth can make it a little bit easier and a little less isolated as well, which is good.
Would you agree, Flik, with that? As additions to the good news column.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with all of that. And also, I was just thinking about the real value of those networks and then the potential for collaboration. So what we are starting to see, and I would say these cogs are moving quite slowly, I mean, faster in some places than others, but in terms of coming together, either as, a lot of sort of federated organisations coming together or organisations that might typically involve a similar type of volunteer, is how can we work together smarter? And from that has born this idea of volunteer passporting. Now, this isn't always going to be the right thing in the right case, but whether a volunteer could, be trained by one organisation and have their induction and some other certain initial things, and from that then be ready to also volunteer in another organisation. Now, obviously, there's lots of background that needs to happen behind that to make sure that's appropriate and safe, and that the volunteer is ready to take on that other role, which is usually the same or very similar. But it is thinking about that, being aware of that bigger picture of all the things that a volunteer manager needs to do, and is there any elements of that could be streamlined because perhaps they've already been trained in X, Y, and Z by another organisation, and that would carry them across.
Yeah, and Alice, am I right in thinking as well, just looking ahead to Volunteers Week, obviously we're talking about Volunteers Week in this episode, that you've got a conference coming up in Volunteers Week. Tell us a little bit about that. What are the big themes?
We do indeed. It's on the 6th of June, which is sort of the last working day of Volunteers Week. So that's the Friday of Volunteers Week, and we'll be hosting that at Belfast Castle. And really, we wanted to make the focus of that event the people who lead and manage and support our volunteers, because if you have a really well-trained volunteer manager who is really enacting all of elements of best practice in volunteer management, then they will have very happy volunteers who they will find much easier to recruit and retain. And so what we had been doing over the last year or so was explaining, that the environment is different, volunteer expectations have changed, they want more flexibility. As Flik mentioned, they don't necessarily see themselves as volunteers. They don't use that word. They're more led by causes and activism. And we have been promoting what those changes are and encouraging organisations to future-proof themselves. And it just occurred that, we're asking these people to create more flexible roles and more micro-volunteering, but that does bring with it a complete change in management style. You're going to have to think differently about how you plan your volunteer-led services with different types of volunteers, and think about things like longer-range succession planning to be built into your recruitment planning for volunteers. And that's a big management task. So I think what we had felt was, look, we've encouraged you for the last year to change what you're doing in terms of volunteer roles and styles. And now what we're trying to do is think about how to rise to that challenge in a managerial sense, is how to rise to the challenge of managing volunteers that you don't see as frequently as maybe the volunteer team you saw before. Maybe you're only going to see one volunteer this once a month rather than once a week, and how to manage relationships that are coming in at different levels. And so we are bringing in Chris Wade to speak to that, and he's going to be speaking to that just in practical sense, but also in terms of using tech and using other volunteers to support you and all the different ways that you can respond to that. But also what we want to do, as well as offering that sort of practical, useful advice, is to, once we have a room full of volunteer managers, coordinators, is to ask for their opinions about what the real challenges have been for them and what support they need. And we're doing that under the sort of auspices of the Year of the Volunteer will be next year. The Year of the Volunteer is next year. It's going to be launched in December. And we want to ask these volunteer managers and leaders, what does that mean to you? What would you like us to be focusing on in that year? What are the big challenges for you? And if there was a solution for your problems, what would they look like? And just gathering that insight from the coalface, as it were, because certainly for me, I did, most of my career is in volunteer management, but for the last 3 years with Volunteer Now, it's been supporting volunteer managers and in training for them. So I haven't been out there trying to recruit and retain. So I would really like to hear from those managers and leaders in volunteering about how's that working out now with these different expectations and in that different environment. And as a follow-on from that, what do organisations like what should we be providing for you? What sort of updated training or information or support do we need to be bringing in to keep up to date with all these changes?
Just bringing it back to the UK, I know it's the global year of the volunteer next year, but here in the UK, what would the two of you, what's the one thing you'd love to see change in terms of volunteering here in the UK in, say, the next sort of 12 months? If you could wave a magic wand, what's the one thing you'd like to happen, Alice?
Oh, if it's wave a magic wand time, then I would like to see more investment in the charitable and voluntary and community-based organisations, an investment that actually reflects the volume of work that they do and how essential they are to the smooth running of the country. If it was something a little bit less, blue sky and a bit more grounded, I would like to see, just especially in the third sector. If we can start with the third sector, I'd be happy that there is a greater appreciation of volunteers and of the people who recruit and manage and look after them within charities and third sector organisations, that we stop seeing volunteers as this nice added extra and really appreciate it as fundamental to our work, and the people who look after them and recruit them as being fundamental to that.
Fantastic. And Flik, if I passed you the magic wand or the reality wand, what would you wish for?
Well, I think it is about, it's about that value of volunteering, and what I would like to see is what I'm going to call a whole systems approach to volunteering. And, in Wales and other nations, I know they're looking at kind of new visions, new approaches to volunteering at that kind of government and membership body level. And the purpose of those is to think about who are all the stakeholders here, and how do we, create a vision that we can all work towards, and what therefore needs to happen to bring that vision to life. So the strapline that I've taken from the vision in Wales is that it's about volunteering as a way of life for everyone who would want to. And with that in mind, we can then think about, well, what are the enablers and what are the barriers to volunteering, and where do we, start to turn the cogs in the right direction? And whilst, ultimately it might be down to that, that it might come down to the recruitment piece, but what's in the way, and how can we enable that? So, I'm glad to see these things are happening and that steps are moving forward. And I think, over the next few years, we are going to see some really good changes.
And my last question for me is a little bit of that one solution that may or may not exist out there. But if a small charity is feeling overwhelmed, that, they're realizing that the volunteer landscape is changing, and they want more micro volunteering or more family volunteering, but they just don't think they've got the resources to it. What's the one thing that what's the one bit of advice you would give them if they wanted to address that? Flik?
Well, to be honest, they're time to take a step back and speak to their existing volunteers, because their existing volunteers are absolute wealth of information. Whatever it is that got them there worked for them, and it could work for others. So, don't go down the road just yet of whether it's we need more young people, we need to create micro, we need to do this. Is speak to who you've got and build from there, and you may well be able to co-design some solutions together.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And the one thing that I would say, especially if it's a small organisation, if you're a volunteer manager or coordinator in a really small organisation and this just feels really overwhelming, it's like you aren't alone. Okay, so depending on where you are in the UK, in Northern Ireland, it would be Volunteer Now, there's Volunteer Scotland, the NCVO in England, WCVA in Wales. There are volunteer supporting organisations out there for you to draw support from. There's support officers, there's development officers, there are, there's actual people for you to speak to, but then there's also information sheets, and there's templates, and there's guidance out there. It's sometimes a very, very lonely job, and a very, very busy job. You're always going forward, and there's always new challenges. And so I would say, take care of your self-care and take a step back and take a breath, and reach out for whatever support you can get. And don't be shy about reaching out for support to other volunteer managers in other small charities, because everybody's struggling a little bit, and you can gain so much from just watching somebody else's practice. Just one little idea, one notion can suddenly totally change your outlook. But sometimes it's a matter of overwhelm, and really what you need to do is just take a step back and take a breath.
Alice and Flik, thank you both so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic to welcome you onto the show, and fantastic to hear so much about volunteering and to get us all excited for Volunteers Week coming up in a week's time. So we're super excited. Alice, Flik, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
If you caught our last couple of episodes, you'll know we've kicked off a brand new regular feature here on The Charity Show, shining a light on the UK's incredible small charities. There are thousands of them quietly making a huge impact in their communities, often with tiny teams, tight budgets and bags of determination. So if you're part of a small charity doing big things, we want to hear from you. Drop us a message at thecharityshowpod@gmail.com or use the links in the show notes to get in touch. Tell us who you are, where you're based, who you're supporting, what difference you're making and what you need. Whether it's partnerships, resources, or just a bit of amplification, we'll do our best to help share it. So, Piers, who's in the spotlight for you this week?
So Louise Rachel Wells has got in touch with the show this week. She's from the Goodwill Revolution. It's a brand new CIC, that means a community interest company, that's committed to helping those who really need it most in the Black Country, West Midlands. These individuals' families may find themselves at a time of hardship, adversity or crisis through no fault of their own and need a helping hand. So the charity says that it steps in when no other help or support is available, and the support is offered on a bespoke basis. They only gather referrals from trusted professionals who work closely with the public. Reading from their website, the team at the Goodwill Revolution say that our approach is unique. We work through referrals from people who work directly with those in the community, those who truly know the individuals and families in need. These people see and hear about the struggles firsthand, and they know where a little help can make a world of difference. They're the key to connecting us with those who need us most. The website and the charity goes on to say that we're here to offer a helping hand. We understand that every situation is different and we strive to provide the right support at the right time. The charity is powered, it says, by the generosity of our community. Imagine the impact if we all paid kindness forward for less than the cost of a loaf of bread per week, it says anecdotally. Just £1 a week can make a tangible difference to someone in the Black Country. So, simple concept there, linking local donors with local need over in the West Midlands. What have you got, Tim?
Well, I've got another great charity that's doing amazing work on a local level. Sabine Hampe North. Sabine, I'm so sorry. I'm sure I pronounced your name terribly wrong there. I'll give it another go. Sabine Hampe North. Great name. Anyway, she got in touch to tell us about Be Free Young Carers, the only independent charity in Oxfordshire working exclusively with young carers. And I delved into their website to find out a bit more about them. And their website says, we support young carers by widening their life options and improving their emotional and social health, resilience and development, because we passionately believe they can be free to fulfill their adult potential unhindered by their childhood responsibilities. We've been operating, it says on the website, for more than 30 years across southern Oxfordshire, throughout South Oxfordshire, the Vale of White Horse districts, Oxford City, and have recently expanded into West Oxfordshire. We offer support and advice dedicated to improving the lives and well-being of young carers. We are currently the only specialist charity supporting children and young people aged 8 to 17 years old with a caring role in Oxfordshire. We provide advice and guidance, offer befriending and peer support, enabling young carers to meet, socialise and have fun, increasing their self-confidence and improving their mental well-being. We work with local schools to educate and offer guidance from referrals to respite opportunities. We are a not-for-profit charity and not government-funded, relying solely on your donations and fundraising efforts to carry on our amazing work for young carers. So they sound like a brilliant charity. And if I'm not mistaken, I might have to very quickly Google this. It's Carers Week coming up in June, very early in June, I think. So I think we're just around the corner from Carers Week. So very timely mention for them. So fantastic, Be Free Young Carers, fantastic charity in Oxfordshire, doing some great work with young people who themselves are doing amazing things for the people they love. So yeah, amazing.
Yeah, I love that one, Tim. There's a few families that I work with that have young carers for people affected by brain tumours, and they are such an inspirational bunch. So yeah, close to home, that one as well. So that's another brilliant pair of small charities. And remember, you can nominate your small charity by emailing us at thecharityshowpod@gmail.com or heading to the show notes. And that's a wrap for episode 26. A huge thanks to Flik and Alice for inspiring us to try a bit of micro-volunteering. You up for a bit of micro-volunteering, Tim?
Absolutely, Piers. We'll have to see what we can come up with.
With all that spare time you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We'll try our best, eh? We'll definitely try our best. We'll get stuck into it. And we've got plenty coming up in coming episodes of the show too. We'll be back next Monday with another The Charity Show Bites. And then the week after that, we're going to be diving back into the world of AI to find out what a new charity AI task force is all about. It's going to be a good one.
Before we go, we'd love to hear from you, whether you're running a campaign, organising volunteers, or just quietly getting on with the work. We know this sector's full of great stories. Drop us a voice note or a message using the links in the show notes and let us know what you think we should be talking about.
And don't forget, if there's a small UK charity you think deserves a bit of love, tell us about it. Head to the show notes to nominate them for our small charity spotlight. It could be yours or one you admire from afar.
If you've enjoyed the episode, hit follow or subscribe on your podcast app. And if you've got a moment, a quick 5-star review helps others find the show.
So that's a wrap for episode 26. Thanks so much for listening, supporting and being part of it. Take care and we'll see you next time.